Ladies and gentlemen, if I may, it is really my great honor and pleasure to have the opportunity to facilitate a discussion between such a distinguished audience and His Excellency the President of Rwanda. We're so committed to making this interesting and exciting that we're going to skip any opening remarks and move right into a set of questions. So if you'll all allow me to ask one or two to get the ball rolling, please think of some of your own, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. I would only say, as a short prequel to my first question, that without citing reams of statistics, Rwanda has clearly been a success story in infrastructure and in all areas of economic development. It's not without its flaws, but in a world that struggles, this is a country that's really been noticeable in its great achievements. And this is an opportunity, I think, for us to learn both what has worked well, what innovations have been applied, but also, even in a world of great successes, what things haven't gone so well and what can we learn from those too. So I wanted to start by asking the first question, Mr. President, by saying, as you were thinking through the economic development and the infrastructure of Rwanda many years ago, what were the most important innovations that you put in place to ensure that you would be successful? What did you do differently than people before you and than other people that you studied that helped you ensure that you could achieve what you wanted to achieve?
Well, thank you. But let me, first of all, thank you for enabling me to be here to participate with everyone here in this subject and discussion. And for being here to share and learn and tell our own story. But what we've tried to do, first of all, we have to take into account the history and the circumstances of Rwanda. And for us, right from the beginning, we recognized that we were starting from a very low base, first of all. Secondly, that infrastructure is very critical, very important in terms of fighting poverty and attaining growth, economic growth. But attaining economic growth alone is not what we are looking at. It's getting growth linked with how our people develop. So that brings into play our citizens participation, our citizens' ownership of the processes in terms of that. So the innovations came in the area, for example, we have a vision spanning 20 years. We have a vision called 2020. And the key pillars to that are infrastructure. But infrastructure as an enabler of many other sectors that contribute to fighting poverty and for our realization of this growth. When we looked at agriculture, and agriculture is another part embodied in our vision, agriculture is the mainstay for the whole population. And we had to think of moving from subsistence agriculture to commercial agriculture, where citizens would get engaged in agriculture and get money from that. So the innovations that came about were in the area. For example, when we invested in infrastructure, say in ICT, information and communication technology, and enabled and made it accessible to ordinary citizens, there are different applications thereof that have helped our people to access markets. In fact, even for the investments we made in social sectors, we found ICTs were helping in education, in health, and also in agriculture. Yep. For agriculture, accessing markets, for education, applications serving in various ways and making it easy for our people to study and learn as much as they can.
Yep. So one of the things that's interesting, and you said around our small table earlier today, that one of the keys was that you prioritized, that you couldn't build everything, so you picked what to build first, and that you linked those things to specific pillars of economic growth, as you've just described. Now, many countries try this, but the domestic political process doesn't allow them to do it. And in the end, they don't build what they should. They build the wrong things. How did you manage the domestic political process to build what you really needed to build and not end up building nothing or build the wrong things?
Well, that's a very good question. And really, to say what we've been doing, we haven't, what we have done are no miracles. These are things that are doable, first of all, that anybody, probably many other people may know better than us. But the difference lies exactly in that question, and maybe what I may say about that question and how I may answer it. That is, we build institutions, but these institutions cannot work alone. It's about people, and therefore leaders that will make these institutions work and will also implement the very policies that people have identified that should be serving them to get the results they want. So the difference is in moving from what you've put in place and what you know to actually doing what you need to be doing in order to get the results. That's where always the difference lies. Mm-hmm. People will know a lot about what they want to do. They may have institutions to serve them. They have good policies. But if there is no follow-through, then there is a problem. And for us, what we did, starting with myself and other leaders, we've always been there and speaking to our people and talking to them and telling them that this is what we can do together, and it is them to do it as well as ourselves working with them to get the results we want. And as we pushed hard, got some results, then we use those results to demonstrate that more can be done and to everybody's benefit. So it's always work in progress, and it's about insisting. It's about being there to say, this is all we need to do. Nobody's going to come from so far away to come and do it for you. And this is what we have agreed we should do. And this is, now if we are able to show the results, at least from some of the things we have done, then things start moving forward.
So in the plenary today, people talked about the need for the leadership to show political will. And you're saying you were there, you created the Ministry of Infrastructure, you created a PPP unit,
right?
And you were there with them every step of the way, making sure that they could follow through.
Absolutely.
There are two other things you did that I wanted to ask about, which I think relate to questions that the audience had. You put in place in 2003 a zero tolerance for corruption policy. Right. And in 2004, you put in place a national doing business task force. Right. These are things that lots of people talk about and nobody does. How hard was it to do that? And why were they successful?
Well, for them to work, you need everybody's buy-in. They need to be part of the process.
They couldn't have all bought into a zero tolerance for corruption task force.
This is, I'm coming to, maybe I started not right from the beginning, but somewhere in the middle. For putting such a thinking in place, it starts with the leaders.
Yes.
They say, you know, we need to have something that is going to work for us and deliver something else. So the policies, the thinking originates with leaders. Mm-hmm. But in communication with those, our citizens, we are able to show them what the importance of this is all about and how it is about delivering
and how did you
on some of the expectations. Yeah. So when we thought about doing business and putting there the national task force, mm-hmm. we were showing them we need to enable our people to be able to do business mm-hmm. to their benefit, to grow our economy and building on agriculture and so on and so forth. But we go out and talk to them and argue with them and debate with them and even ask from them what the alternative might be that they have in mind that can improve what we have put in place with them, with the few that thought about it. And this is how the buy-in comes in. And I would say maybe for us, we have also been helped by a number of other things that maybe people may be surprised about here. With our very tragic history and very different circumstances, I think there has been a silver lining to that in terms of, people being challenged so much that when you approach people and say, we need to think of a way out of this, they are there with you to think with you what needs to be done out of that. But of course, the leaders will play a more important role because some of these strategies or some of these policies will need, some of these ideas that will come from few people, not everybody, but you bring the others on board to understand what needs to be done. This is really how it works. Okay. So we start with ideas. We start with looking at ideas that answer to the problems we have and the challenges we have, and then communicate directly with the people and say, we find the simplest language in which to express it, and we go to the remotest parts of our country. I have had town hall meetings. I have had people in their tens of thousands, and I spend 5 hours with them, talking to them, asking questions. We are answering questions. Ministers are there. Other leaders are there. And by the time we leave the place, we have, a very big section of the population understanding something. And we put it in a very simple language that people will come to understand.
So this is a battle that's not won in the office, it's won in the field.
Not at all. You have to be there in the field and identify yourself with the people and the challenges and the solutions there.
So I'll ask one last question, and then I'll leave you here and wander the audience to solicit questions. Yes. There must have been some disappointments along the way. What, when you look back, did you really wish had worked and didn't work, and why not?
Well, it's a very broad question and complicated one, but I'll say pick one of them. We tried in public-private partnerships. We tried at some point to say, no, I think some of these things need to be carried out and led by the private sector. Government doesn't need to get involved in this. For example, in making certain investments. And we later on discovered that maybe we are at a stage or at a level of our economy where really the private sector is not well developed to the extent that it can take on some of the challenges that we were facing. It always required that strong partnership, or sometimes the government going out and actually making the kinds of investments and taking the risks and covering the risks. And when the business has worked and seemed to be working well and profitable, government has quickly pulled out and handed this to the private sector. Now, we didn't have to do this. If the private sector could just be told that this is what is going to work and put in your money and make the business, but the whole country benefits. So it didn't work as well as we wanted. One simple example is with utilities. Our utility company had all along been in the hands of government. And at one point we said, well, let's pass it to the private sector to run that. It didn't work very well. First of all, people shied away from it. It required huge investments. Secondly, there was an outcry that people are saying, no, if you give utility companies to the private sector, all they may think about is about their returns, and the affordability and accessibility for every citizen may not be realized. But somebody may make money with a utility company, but at the same time, it will not have the kind of impact you expect from what the population expects. Yeah. So we tried that. It didn't work. There was really a very big problem, and the population was up in arms almost against us, thinking that the government is insensitive about their welfare and other things. So we had to take over again the company. So we failed on that.
Okay.
Maybe we didn't think through properly, or we didn't understand the level of concern the population had. But we have been successful with others. For example, at the beginning, because our tourism industry is growing very fast, and therefore we needed hotels and other kind of infrastructure and services that serve that. So the government asked the private sector to invest in hotels and other infrastructure, and they were not forthcoming.
Not forthcoming.
So
okay.
At least not as fast as we wanted. So the government took the initial step to make the investments. And when the businesses were viable and up and running, we started we went back into, we started divesting from the kinds of investments we had made. So okay. it has helped to speed up the process.
Okay. So then the first point you made about the importance of ensuring the buy-in of the citizenry as you seek private sector involvement is something we hear all around the world, and is a lesson we see not just in developing countries, but even in developed countries where certain utilities go to be privatized, and the local constituents sometimes really resist that. Absolutely. For exactly the reasons you're talking about.
Completely.
I'm going to now ask from the audience if there are any questions. I'll start with someone from the back.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you so much. I know that one of the areas in which you've also been innovative is working with Visa Corporation. The country is allied with Visa to go out and reach people far away from cities, and it's a different kind of infrastructure. It's a digital infrastructure, but banking the unbanked. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And the big question is, many of us have just watched Spielberg's Lincoln. And one wonders, if you think about infrastructure in the time of the American Civil War, if you had the rate and speed of investment in the kinds of things you're doing in the United States, I wonder whether we would have brought the country back together quicker, or whether you would have divided people. And I'm interested whether infrastructure, after such a trauma that Rwanda had, actually enhances and improves relations among those that were at war, or whether or not you have to do other things to mitigate those tensions because you're throwing them together so quickly, digitally, by roads, infrastructure, communications, et cetera.
Thanks,
I'm Steve Clemens of The Atlantic.
Thanks, Steve.
Yes. This is a very complex area indeed. There are so many complications, but at least the results we have had on the ground will speak to the success in some of the things we have done. And for us, we started from the understanding that investing in infrastructure and investing in other areas are complementary. They are not conflictual. This is the whole beginning. And we really saw it right from the start. For example, we understood that if we invest in information and communication technology, we are actually investing in schools. We're investing in education, because these tools bring education closer to people. And so schools does not mean classrooms only. They are important, they are required, but we have, the investments we made in digital infrastructure provided the kinds of virtual classrooms and books and everything. But we found that also served health, because, for example, we have different applications that were built on that, where there's a system, say, called TrackNet. It's a health delivery management system, which across the country will connect doctors with patients, will bring knowing what drugs are there and what levels and where they are, to both the practitioners in the health sector as well as the patients. And this reduces the different costs that people would have incurred, for example, taking road transport and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And particularly with the visa, we have seen how the investment we have had with the visa and how that has contributed to financial inclusion for a very big percentage of our population. They need that because it's part of their daily lives and what activities they're involved in to make a difference for themselves in a social and economic process and transformation that we're involved in. So we didn't want to say, oh, if you have a computer, but why should you have a computer when, you have no classroom and, there's... So we looked at it comprehensively and all together and started indeed prioritizing, making sure that if we make one investment here, it connects with the other and improves the other and so on and so forth. So we didn't desegregate what we were doing.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting, thinking about in partnerships with companies like Visa that most of us wouldn't think of as infrastructure companies as part of your overall infrastructure plan. You had a question right there.
Thank you. President Kagame, I would like to ask 3 questions. The first is about...
Can I ask for one question? Thank you.
They're all very related. But let me ask this. It's about how you've been able to move from ideas or policies to action. You said you have obviously implemented Vision 2020 for Rwanda. I'm aware that Nigeria has Vision 2020. Kenya has Vision 2030. South Africa has Vision. Ghana, every African country has Vision something, something. But we have not been able to move from vision into action. President, how were you able to make that major transition? The second one, if I can ask, is really about role model. I think, President Kagame, you are becoming recognized as a role model for African leaders. Do you think this will make a big difference? The Mo Ibrahim Foundation has tried over the past 10 years or so to create this possibility of using presidents like yourself to create a model for African leaders. But I'm afraid I think it's not working because in the last 3 or 4 years, they have not selected a winner for that Mo Foundation.
Okay.
Do you think role modeling, particularly for leadership in Africa, will be the way to go?
Let's start with the question on execution. It's a great question.
Yeah,
and I would say it's not just African countries. Almost every city in America, almost every country anywhere in the world has had this vision, and very few of them have been able to execute as you have.
I think I did speak a little bit to that particular question. First, challenged by the kind of situation you have been facing. There are a number of things that come into play and interact. One, you think about what is the problem. You define the problem you are facing. The second, the structure or the institutions that you need to go through to deliver on the problem. But there are also ideas and the policies that give answers to that problem. Now, all these we are talking about, institutions and so on and so forth, or generation of ideas, you are really talking about people. It's the same people that, therefore, you have to manage, you have to work with to make sure that what we are talking about is going to be done and be seen to be done. You move, therefore, from theory to real practice and looking at the results. Now, here, I will quickly answer the second one. So when I'm talking about people, therefore, I'm talking about leaders and those they lead or work with to carry out the actual implementation. Now, the problem comes in, and I cannot fully explain that or satisfy anybody that I have a complete answer to it. The difference lies in having people follow through these ideas and actually do what needs to be done. And this is why I said what Rwanda is doing can be done by any other country or by any other people, or maybe done better, right? But the difference may be between the results we get and the results other people may not get is simply being there and being able to do what you want to do and what you know you need to do in order to get the results. You may have good ideas, but if you sit with them and don't do anything based on those ideas and implement and follow through with the results, then you won't get the results. So what we are doing is, as I said, is known. I explained, we take the whole day showing you what we are doing in Rwanda. It's not anything that anybody doesn't know. But we are doing it and trying to do it maybe the right way in our own circumstances with the results that are there to speak for themselves. So the role model thing which is being talked about. Well, I think the best thing is to share the best practices. I think it's more of what people are doing that translate into the results they want that should really be exciting and should be form lessons for others to say if we did that, rather than just one individual, a role model who will go there and, get rewards and so on and so forth. Fine, you can do that. But I don't think it translates into good results like seeing what is being done, say, in a country and say, oh, in terms of governance, what is in place is like this. It works like this. In this sector, they've done this. They have succeeded or they have faced problems and made corrections and so on and so forth, and they ended up with these results. And remember, you have to adapt all this to different circumstances. Earlier on, we were discussing, and I was telling you how we've learned from different countries to see what ideas work for them to deal with certain situations and problems, and how we have adapted that to our own situation. We can't take something and just swallow it the way it is from another place. We have to see whether it fits into our situation and circumstances and whether it will deliver results. So the role model aspect is about maybe individuals who have done this, they're talked about, they are rewarded, but there is more to that. I wish we could see, well, where so-and-so is the leader on the ground, how are things working? How do they work? Why do they work and in other places? And then looking at those practices, you stand a better chance of improving other situations than just looking at the role model. Okay.
Questions from this side of the room? Please.
Quick one. It's on infrastructure. I'm an engineer, so it's an infrastructure question.
Okay.
You're a landlocked country.
Here you go.
President, you live in a landlocked country. Did that change what you needed to do with the infrastructure? Did that add different challenges?
Being landlocked is a challenge with or without the required infrastructure. Of course, without required infrastructure, the challenge becomes much bigger. So in any case, the common denominator is infrastructure. We need to deal with infrastructure, invest in infrastructure, and develop that. And being landlocked is one other kind of pressure we have had that has made Rwanda also think hard about how to go around it and move on, because we can't change Rwanda being landlocked, but we can overcome that by the kinds of infrastructure we invest in ourselves, but also together with others, say, in the region. We have the East African community, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, and ourselves as a community of countries. And we have been looking at how we can invest together in modernizing our infrastructure so that each of us is served well. So, and that has also come to make us, for us to believe that we need to invest in certain aspects of our economy that make this position of being landlocked less problematic to us. And that is investment in high-value products or services, and so on and so forth. Because if you have bulk products that you have to transport to the ports either of Mombasa or Dar es Salaam, understandably, this will be a very big problem. So that's why we, in fact, earlier, as we said, when we are investing with Visa, when we are, different aspects of financial services, or when we are relying on IT applications and so on and so forth, when we are such a things, it is to lessen that burden on our being landlocked that raises. So, but that also brings into play, can we improve our road transport? Can we invest in railroads and so on and so forth? So that's another area where commonly as a region, we're also trying to invest.
So a lot of the investments in information technology and becoming a logistics hub not only solves for being landlocked, but almost takes advantage of being landlocked and opens up new industries.
Absolutely.
We had a question in the back.
Thank you. Mr. President, I'm Raymond Chen, MTR Corporation, Hong Kong. I want to ask you, how do you select your cabinet? Or in general, how do you manage the risk of the president coming up with a wrong idea?
Well, first of all, there has to be a cabinet so that it is not the president alone, because the president alone cannot work and deliver on anything until he has a team that supports the president. Second is, in selecting, say, the cabinet or the team that delivers for the country, you have to look at the diversity of the country. You have to look at different interests of the population and the representativity of the population. So to speak, even in a political sense, and that is related to the earlier point we made about the buy-in. If the population feels broadly represented in the team that serves the nation, then the buy-in becomes easier. This is the experience again. And in fact, there are other aspects, say, of our Constitution that have taken into consideration these kinds of things almost to the extreme. We've insisted on it to a fault. For example, because of wanting to be inclusive and make sure that we have a constitution which builds on or highlights the aspect of the winner doesn't take all. What do I mean here? For example, in formation of a cabinet of ministers, the ruling party, for which I'm, say, president, the Rwandese Patriotic Front, is not supposed to have more than 50% of cabinet members in cabinet. We have 50% of cabinet maximum belonging to the party. The other 50% has to be drawn from the other political parties. Of course, I'm sure in this room there are people who will feel that that sounds very strange. But this is something that works for us. In other places, the winner takes all. You find when one group is coming in, the others are, all of them are packing their bags and looking elsewhere to go. So we have done this. Even when you go to the parliament our constitution tells us that the Speaker of Parliament cannot come from the same party as the head of state. The Speaker of Parliament has to come from other parties that did not win elections or from the minority parties. So there are these checks and balances that are enshrined in the Constitution so much that it is not left to individuals to practice what maybe many people want to see done, but it's something that was discussed and arrived at, and the people of Rwanda decided this is what delivers for us. So that's how the cabinet is selected. But another thing is, not to offend anybody, we try to look for young and energetic people who can stand the test of the pressures of this work, as well as make sure that women are very well represented in our institutions.
Very good. I think we have time for one more question, perhaps, and then we can move on to the, yeah.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, you talked about the vision, you talked about funding, you talked about leadership. What I still would love to hear you talk about is how did you create the capacity to deliver the program? Whenever I'm traveling through Africa, the one thing, and Jimmy would argue that's the same topic in the United States, is we don't have the capacity to deliver all the infrastructure plans that we actually need. And the question associated with that is, how did you think about the balance between building that capacity and the capabilities in Rwanda versus relying on external sources, foreign countries, to provide you with that capacity? Thank
Capacity, you mean human talent, is that right?
Well, it's about talent and just having the capacity to build the roads, to build the power stations that you did.
Okay. There are many aspects to that. One, say, is in the last 15 years, we've made huge investments in building institutional and human capacity. We made sure that, for example, in terms of human capacity, say in education and training and in specific areas, our national budget goes up to 17% in education and training and making sure that we build human capacity every year for all these years. And we have seen talent develop and so on and so forth. The other aspect is we've been realistic about our development. As I said earlier, we started from a very low base, almost in everything, but we had to do something. As we have been building our human capacities and also strengthening and developing our institutional capacities, we have had to do many things. One, the external support or the hand that people have had from outside, we have appreciated it, but we have taken control of our processes. We've said we need support, but we have had battles going on to say, look, this is for us. We need to own this process, but we appreciate your support. So let's work together. We have had many challenges where people want to come and they want to help, but they want to help their own way and even want to determine your own priorities. And we have had debates along this with success here and there and problems in other areas. But nonetheless, we've been able to have the net gain of that. We even worked to say on our immigration policy. We reformed that to accommodate a process that would serve us well. Like it is known in our region, members from our region, or people, professionals from our region, or people who want to make investments in Rwanda, there are no immigration difficulties. Even work permits which previous, long ago, the administration used to charge very highly as if nearly to make it prohibitive so that people don't come to Rwanda. We've waived all of that. What we wanted was, while we still have this gap in terms of capacity, both institutional and human, to allow people from the region and across the continent, or even from outside the continent, to easily to be attracted to come and work in Rwanda, so that we actually fill the other gap that was there. And we've seen there are more people from our region, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Burundi, coming to work in Rwanda and have their base in Rwanda and stay in Rwanda. Many of them even apply to be Rwandans and so on and so forth. And this is how we managed to overcome this gap, the deficit that was there for us. But at the same time, we've been training our people. So having our people trained and building our capacity has not conflicted with kind of allowing the capacity from outside to come. In fact, the problem people anticipated that, say, the nationals would complain and say, no, but people from outside are taking, our jobs and so on and so forth, has not existed, because as we've seen our capacity increase, our talent increase, the pool of talent, we've also seen that there is more to do that needs those increasing numbers as well as those that came from outside. So because of the growth, and there is a very fast growth in different sectors, we are able to absorb people, and it has served us very well.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. As you've answered these questions, I've heard a few themes come through. One is that at the very beginning, you linked your infrastructure priorities to specific planks of economic development and chose very carefully amongst all the things you could do, the few that you really needed to do. You then executed with an enormous amount of passion, and the one note that rings over and over is your statement that it takes personal commitment from the leadership of the country to get into the field and execute, 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 and to make sure you get the support of the people so that they don't get in the way of what is actually, in the end, required for the development of the country. Yes. You've also just used two very important words in terms of capacity building. It's institutional capacity and individual capacity. So it's building the capabilities of the individuals through education, but also lasting institutions that can deliver infrastructure over time. Right. And finally, you made a very strong point that in the end, Rwanda has to own Rwanda's efforts and infrastructure. It can't be outsourced to other people. Right. I think those are all terrific lessons for us to think about. So on behalf of the audience, I'd like to thank you for this very stimulating conversation. I'd like to thank the audience for some great questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.